Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. A huge thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. Couple noticeable things here.
Yes,
One
Jimmy.
is that we have these lovely new microphones.
Yes, we do.
We upgraded thanks to a very generous donation. These are the things that we love about podcasting and about our patrons and about life in general, is that people help us to make things better, and we like to improve. We like to keep the equipment up to date and improve it where we can. So this was a case where we were able to do that.
I am giving all this credit to Jimmy for setting everything up, and basically all he does is put this in front of my face and say, talk. Make sure you
Now you don't have to see Granny mess with that big pop filter, and
I can't do that stuff.
She has less to fidget with, and these are these are big, heavy, over nice, 2 pound microphones, and they're top quality. So we're glad to have them.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Another plug for people who might want to become patrons. Beginning this month I have to look at our trusty dusty calendar. On Tuesday the 18th, we are beginning, it's for our $25 and up tiers. We're doing a training once a month on Zoom. And this is a training on prevention of abuse and how to recognize deception techniques. And these are trainings that I developed over the past several years, and I've given them to trainings that I've done at the military, police departments, corrections officers in prisons, schools, churches.
And I've not seen all of Jimmy's trainings. I've seen a couple of them, but I have not seen all of them. So this is going to be really unique information that you're getting. You are not going to want to miss out on this.
And I actually don't do my trainings anymore. Right. I kind of backed out of doing that just because traveling when you have little kids is not the best scenario. And,
and COVID put the nip on that.
COVID kind of stopped all that. So
right.
Anyway, just a plug for that. And these videos will not be made available publicly. So because it's a reward for our patrons, we're going to keep it that way. If you want access to that, you can become a patron. And another thing is, with Patreon, there's no commitment. So if you want to come in and wait a couple months and you want to watch some of the videos and then cancel your subscription, you can absolutely do that. There's nobody twisting arms to get people to stay as a patron.
We would love to keep you. We think we have a lot of wonderful benefits if you continue on as a patron. But as Jimmy said, there's not going to be any pressure on your part.
None. Absolutely zero.
Right.
Okay, so this week's podcast, I could not believe when I went back and looked through that we have never done one specifically on what the reporting process looks like. We've mentioned it. We've talked about what it was like, kind of emotionally being in the police station. But what constitutes a reportable incident? But more importantly, for the sake of this episode, what are the nuts and bolts for reporting? What should you expect when you walk into a police station or call the police or whoever you're mandated to report to? What does it look like?
Right.
What can you expect? So that's what we're going to talk about this episode. I want to start by saying, first of all, sometimes we really overcomplicate things.
We do.
And we want to think about every scenario and play out what could happen if I report this, these things could happen, these things might happen, these things probably won't happen. And we overanalyze.
What if I'm wrong?
What if I'm wrong?
How involved do I have to get with when I report?
Will they know that I was the one who reported?
What will happen to me? What will happen to my family? And on we go.
So we tend to overthink these things, and an incident just happened yesterday where I wound up at a police station with a rifle. So the story.
Notice my reaction. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just my weird life, but I was out in the yard playing baseball with one of my sons, and a pickup truck drove by, and we heard a crash. Something fell off the side of the pickup, and I was like, well, that's kind of a big object to be laying in the middle of the road, so before somebody runs over it, we better go grab it. So I walk over, and there's a rifle laying in the road.
Honestly, glad it was a rifle and not a body.
Yeah. Who knows around here?
Know. Yeah.
So I picked it up, and I checked it, made sure it wasn't loaded. Thank God it wasn't loaded, because that could have gone off when it dropped. It was a 30-30 deer rifle, so pretty powerful rifle. And it had some damage to it when it fell off. The butt of the gun broke off, and I had some nicks here and there. But I didn't know whose truck this was. I didn't know which neighbor it was or what road they live on. So I was like, well, the most logical thing is to bring it to the police station. So I have a friend who's a local police officer, and I called him on his cell phone. And I was like, hey, this is what happened. I called the police station. Nobody's there. I can't. It was after hours.
Right.
And so when and how do I get it to the police station? So he told me there's an after hours intercom.
Oh,
and he said, just go in the main entrance, and there's an intercom there, and somebody will answer it. So I brought my two sons, and we went over, and right away I was like, well, I probably shouldn't walk up to the main door holding a rifle. Because I
hadn't thought about that.
Oh, I thought about it. I was
might not look real good.
Yeah, knocking on the door after hours, holding a rifle in my hand, probably not the best idea. No. So I left it in the car, and I hit the button and told him what happened. And I mean, this was like a less than a 10-minute process. And I told him what happened, and he's like, oh, okay. He's like, oh, I'll come out and grab the gun, and he's like, I'll take your information. And I gave him a description of the truck. He goes, oh, I know who that is. He goes, you remember all those times the police, like all kinds of police came ripping and tearing past your house, and we went back, and he's like, probably happened, a whole bunch of times this summer. I was like, yeah. I was like, we always wondered who that was. He goes, yeah, the guy who has the gun. He goes, as long as the gun comes back clean, he's like, I'll probably just drop the gun off. So anyway, my point is, the police officer knew what to do because he's trained.
Right.
Exactly. I didn't want to hold on to somebody else's gun. Sorry, it keeps blaring out. I just looked at the screen. Let me move my mic down a little bit. Might have to change the focal points on the camera. But my point is, I didn't overthink it. It could have been a stolen gun. I don't know. He made a point too. This police officer, he was like, seems kind of weird to have a deer rifle when it's not hunting season. He's like, maybe he's doing target practice. Who knows? But he's like, kind of an odd time to be carrying a deer rifle.
Archery season.
It is archery season, but it's not rifle season yet. Right. So I was like, whatever. Not my job to figure it out.
Right.
It's not my job, but it is his job. And he took care of it, and he's like, yep. He's like, I'll run the serial numbers on the gun, and I'll get it figured out. Cool.
Okay.
I walked away. Reporting abuse is really not much different. However, it's hard when it's people's lives who are at stake. And I think that's what really trips us up. And so we, naturally think of every possible scenario and what could go wrong and what might go wrong. So I want to kind of get through the noise of that and say what actually happens when you walk into that police station, and why Why are you going there? So a couple different scenarios. Of course, the one with my sister, with Alex, was a little bit easy to figure out because we didn't see any other option.
Right.
She was accusing my father of abusing her when she was very young. And we're like, this is automatically out of our area of expertise. Right. And if you find yourself in that situation where you say, this is way out of my league, that's a sign you ought to report it.
Oh, absolutely.
That ought to be an automatic, I'm going to bring this to the police station because I don't know. And I'm going to tell you, I had another situation that I didn't have a clue, and it was pretty high stakes. And it involved child abuse between two children. I was like, I really don't know. Like, adult, child, like, I understand that. I get that. But I didn't know what to do. I showed up at the police station. I said, I really don't know what to do with this information. And it turned out what I was reporting was not a reportable incident. And I found that out immediately just by showing up and talking to a police officer who knew how to handle their job.
And that took a lot of pressure off of you.
100%.
Because, you knew you had done the right thing as far as going to try to report, but you also found out that was not a reportable incident.
And I was no longer sitting on information, stressing about what to do with that. I got it out. I put it out there. I said, this is a situation. I gave every detail that I could possibly give. And the answer was, oh, well, that's actually not a reportable incident. And here's why.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. Now I can go home and I can breathe.
Right.
So, it's one of those things, and I think people need to realize you will not get in trouble for making a report in good faith. If it's not a reportable incident, the police officer is going to say, okay, well, thank you for reporting, but it's not a reportable incident, but thank you for coming in anyway.
Exactly right. Can you, and I think a lot of people want to know this, can you report an incident by telephone?
Absolutely.
Number one. And number two, can you report an incident and remain anonymous and trust that your name will remain anonymous? Because a lot of people don't want others to know that they've reported it.
Yeah. So you can make a report by phone. You do not have to be there in person. Sometimes they'll request that you come in and they'll want to talk to you to make a statement. You can decline that. You can say, no, I really would rather not. And to my knowledge, that's fully acceptable. I don't think there's anything that says a mandated reporter has to report in person. In fact, PA Childline that we have here in Pennsylvania, that's all by phone.
Right.
Or internet. You can make a report online. As far as being anonymous, I know that it's a little bit tricky. You cannot make an anonymous report as an anonymous person, if that makes sense. You can make a report and give your information and ask to remain anonymous.
That's what I thought.
You can do that.
The reason I'm asking this question is I get asked this a lot because there are husband-wife situations where a wife suspects abuse on a child, but if her husband would find out that she reported that because he is abusive to her, it could make home life really more explosive than it already is.
Exactly right. And I think that's why the majority of people don't report.
Right.
Because they're afraid of retaliation.
Exactly right.
So, you cannot call and say, hey, I'm calling anonymously to report abuse, even if you saw it, even if you're a victim of that abuse.
Okay.
You cannot say, I'm reporting this anonymously.
Okay.
You can't do it.
I think that clarifies for a lot of people. Clarifies for them.
But what you can do is you can report the abuse and say, I would like to remain anonymous for my safety and for the safety of others around me.
And of course, the police officers deal with this all the time,
Absolutely.
and they understand.
They're not going to pick up the phone and be like, hey, you know, your wife reported you. They're not going to do that.
And I think that's a big burden of fear on a lot of people. That is a hesitation why a lot of abuse does not get reported.
Yes.
For fear of the retaliation.
Yes. So when you go into a police station or when you call, they're first going to ask for your information. And that's, like I said, you cannot refuse to give your name. You can't say, well, this is a second or a First Amendment audit, free speech. I don't have to give my name. You can't do that. They cannot investigate if it's an anonymous claim, because otherwise anybody could call and report anybody else. And it'd be complete chaos.
It's a heyday then.
So what they'll do is they'll take your information. That'll be the first thing they do. And then they're going to ask for a statement and probably ask if they can record it. In fact, we were recorded when we gave a statement. We said, absolutely. And that's just so that no information is lost, so that they can go back. The officer will go back, review notes, make sure that there were no details that got confused or missed.
Right.
So it most likely would be recorded. And so you give a statement and you give as much detail as you possibly can without giving fluff detail, stuff that doesn't matter, stuff that's relevant to.
And that the officer kind of guides you with the questions. They're pretty point blank. If I remember correctly, we were given some very direct questions to answer, some of which we didn't think had any relevance at all, but obviously it did, because they are the trained to know what questions to ask. Yeah. And all you're asked to do is answer truthfully. That's it.
So after you make a statement, honestly, pretty much you're done.
Right.
And that'll take as long or as short as you make it to be when you give your statement.
Right.
But, for us, I think we were probably in and out in under an hour.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then from there, we never had to give another statement.
No, not at all.
That was it.
All.
We went in,
Not
we reported once. I think what really helped was that we didn't beat around the bush. We didn't try to speculate. And I think that's where a lot of people get into trouble, because they're like, well, I think that this might have been abuse. Well, you're wasting a police officer's time, unfortunately.
Right.
You have to be really to the point and say, here's the reason that I have reasonable suspicion, and that's the threshold. I want to make that point really clear. The threshold for reporting abuse, what makes something reportable, is that you have reasonable suspicion. That means you have reason to suspect, good reason to suspect, that abuse could have happened. Not that abuse did happen, but that abuse likely happened. Because
you're asking for this to be investigated.
Right.
You don't have to go in with the burden of proof.
That's right. So, and we can give some examples of that. And one would be, technology is absolutely just running rampant. Say that your kid starts acting weird, that they deleted something off their phone. They deleted something off their phone, and they're clammed up and will not tell you what. And I'm talking about your minor child. This question was actually asked when I did a training in California. There was a police officer who specialized in doing trainings for talking about devices and apps and all that stuff. She did trainings at schools all over the place, and somebody said, "What do you do if you think that there were pictures?" One lady in the audience, she was like, "I'm pretty sure that my daughter had somebody send her pictures or videos or something. I can't remember." And she's like, "But I checked her phone and I don't see anything on there." You know what the officer said? And the mom was like, "But this is her phone, and so it's her private property." And the officer, you know what she said? She goes, "Not quite."
Right.
She goes, "This is your minor daughter in your house, which means her phone is your phone.
Property. Exactly.
It's your property."
Yes. Yes.
And she said, "What you need to do," she's like, "I'm not suggesting you do this. I'm telling you to do this. Bring that phone into the police station, hand it to an officer, say, I think I have reason to suspect that some nudes were sent to my minor daughter by somebody. I don't know if that was an adult. I don't know if it was another teenager. I don't know, but I suspect that that's what happened." She said, "Do you want to know what they're going to do?" She's like, "This is a fun little fact that the public doesn't know." She said, "We have all kinds of fun little gadgets and toys to tap into that phone and recover deleted information."
Absolutely. You've mentioned time and time again that there is no such thing as delete on a telephone.
No, there is no. You can't delete.
Or a computer. You can't. It's there.
Those images are there permanently. In
They're
fact, if
there.
you ever buy a camera, the camera that we're recording with right now, I went through the manual when I bought it, and it said, more or less, don't do anything illegal or incriminating, because even though you delete images and videos, it is still here.
Absolutely.
Permanently.
Absolutely.
So this police officer said, bring your daughter's phone in, which is actually your phone, and say, I think that there's a good possibility that some criminal activity took place on this phone. Will you take a look at it? And she said, they might even do it on the spot. She's like, not real likely, but she's like, if they're not real busy, they'll take it. But otherwise, they'll take it, and over the next couple days, they'll look into it, and they'll let you know.
Now, this is a mother. What happens if it's a third party, say, that suspects that kids have been doing this? So you're not the mother, you're not the father, but you have teenagers and you overhear a conversation. And they're underage, you overhear they've been sexting or whatever with videos, with pictures and all, and you're worried, genuinely concerned that this is going to lead to all kinds of, criminal acts, which normally does. What do you do in a case like that?
Well, again, I mean, the threshold here is reasonable suspicion. So if you hear kids joking and like, hey, what if Susie sends, sends pictures to whoever, then that's not really reportable. But if you hear somebody say, if you overhear somebody and they're like, hey, I got some really gross pictures that I didn't want, and I deleted them, and this is a minor child,
right.
You now have reason to suspect that some kind of abuse could have happened. That meets the threshold. And again, it's one of those that you have to use your discretion and say, does it meet the threshold of reasonable suspicion? Does it likely involve some kind of abuse? And by the way, even minors sending nude pictures and videos to minors is criminal activity. And this police officer made that point.
Right.
She said, just because they're minors doesn't mean that it's okay.
Right.
She's like, that is absolutely illegal.
And we should stress that. And we did in a previous podcast. I know that we talked about that very thing. And sometimes we think, oh, it's just kid stuff. It's not.
Right.
I mean, it's serious, very, very serious, to be taken seriously. If you hear such talk, do you go to the parents of that child or do you go to report? Which is
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know for sure, but but honestly, I would probably go straight to the police and say, "This is what I heard. This is what's happening," and they'll tell you. I mean,
what you do.
And,
yes.
and I think that's a thing. I think that's why reporting gets so messed up the majority of the time. And there are surveys that have been done out there that find that in school systems where every teacher in the United States is a mandated reporter, that it's something like, I think it's somewhere around 80% of known cases of abuse never get reported. The vast majority,
right.
the overwhelming majority
say that.
of known abuse doesn't get reported by mandated reporters.
Right.
It's illegal for them not to report. So we have to ask ourselves the question, well, what's going on? Well, I'll tell you what happens, and you know too, because you were on the school board.
Yes.
Well, let's pull the teacher in and let's talk to him.
Right.
Get his side of the story.
Right.
No.
Or let's send the kid to the guidance counselor and let the guidance counselor talk to the
Find
kid.
a little bit more information.
Get a little bit.
After all, we don't want to make a report just based on a little bit of information.
Nobody wants to make waves, sadly. And in the meantime, let's face it, Jimmy, it goes on all the time. And until somebody does report, it's going to continue. And kids are kids with a dangerous weapon called a phone. And they have them, and I'll call it that because those phones can be used for good or for bad. And in the hands of, an immature child can be used for really bad.
Well, and I think a good way to help minimize, I know it's not going to do a ton, but it's going to help minimize some of this stuff, is when your kid has a device, tell them that, hey, if I ever suspect that there's any kind of criminal activity and you spell out for them what that criminal activity is, I will take the phone and I will take it into the police station and have them check it because you're important to me. Because you are under my roof. You are the person who, as a parent, I'm charged with protecting you with my life.
To say, and also to explain to a child, there is no such thing as deleting a photo.
Yeah.
That once you send that photo or once you receive that photo on your phone, it's there. You can hit delete 50 times, but it will not take that away. And I think a lot of people just don't understand
and
that.
Kids need to know that.
Kids need to know
just
that.
because something happened on Snapchat and it deletes after
with seconds,
so long,
within 3 seconds.
Doesn't mean that it's deleted. And there have been some cases where, there was all kinds of stuff that was recovered on Snapchat through their servers. And that's the other thing too, even with texting. I think it's important for kids to know, and parents, you ought to know this too, that even if that kid says, "Well, fine, I'll just smash the phone," it's still on servers. You can recover text messages.
Verizon, who I'm with for however many years now, 20 years, I guess, I don't know. Did they have cell phones 20 years ago? I don't remember. I'm a long time.
Those are probably those bag phones, the big
really
heavy.
Bad.
Yeah.
But Verizon, they will print off for you deleted text messages.
Absolutely.
So,
that stuff is recoverable.
It is.
And I think we need to let our kids know that. Right. And in a case like that, even if it's third hand, depending on if it meets that threshold of reasonable suspicion, that you have reason to believe that a child either was abused, could have been abused, or received abusive materials. And that's the other thing too.
Right.
Like we need to call sexual explicit images what they are. When it's being sent to children, that's abuse material. It's not pornography, it's abuse material. And so, again, when in doubt, report. Go report it. And I have a sneeze that's right on the verge.
Move your head away from the microphone. It's gonna be.
I think it's done. Okay. I think the moment passed.
Okay.
By the way, that's the other noticeable thing.
I was going to mention that, but I was waiting till the very end. I was going to say, look at Jimmy, how good he looks today.
I had my phase 2 of my midlife crisis. Phase 1 was to grow my hair for a year, which I did. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 was to shave it.
You got
it. Phase 3 is going to be the motorcycle or convertible.
Gee.
I haven't decided yet.
I thought you were going to say the beard.
No, I'm going big. I'm going big now.
Oh, wow. Motorcycle and beard. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be a motorcycle. It's probably going to be a convertible. I haven't decided yet. That'll be sometime next year. I usually go like each phase lasts about a year.
Okay.
Yeah. But back to reporting. So, yeah, if it meets that threshold, I would say report it, even if you think it's silly to report it. Don't think about all the what ifs, because at the end of the day, you don't know. You can't predict the future.
And when we think of the damage that is done to children, the pain that is caused to children by abuse, is kind of that thing that it's a burden for us to carry out and just report. It's a burden off of our shoulders when we can go to a police officer and say, this is what I think is happening. I'm not sure. Can you investigate into this?
Yes.
And we've done our job then. We know we've done what we can do.
And if they need more, they'll tell you they need more. And that's, I've made reports. I had one, and this one drove me absolutely up a wall. I had printed out, I had a literal file folder full of images, conversations between this grown man, and these minor children. I had pages and pages in this file folder. And I think this was U.S. Marshal. It went through several departments. I started with state police, and then they handed it off to U.S. Marshals because of jurisdiction. Then they handed it off to ICE, Homeland Security. And so I think it was the U.S. Marshals that they're like, well, we're going to need you to get more evidence. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. First of all,
I know who you're talking about.
And second of all, I'm not an investigator. Like, that's your job. And I told him that. I was like, I gave you everything that I've been observing, and that's kind of my limit.
And I think that's a caution also, that we need to tell people. Just because you report doesn't mean that an expert follow-up will be done.
Right.
Officers are overwhelmed. The child abuse line is used significantly more than they have people to follow up. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't still do our part. We need to be active in doing what we can do. And it's disappointing when nothing happens, when there isn't proper follow-up, for sure. But, when there is, it's a victory for the child.
But that's another point, too. Like, if there is an investigation that opens up, I believe you have 30 days. They'll keep a case open for 30 days. And then they'll close it at the end of that 30 days. And so you should ask about that. When you make a report, say, like, is this just going to wind up in a stack of papers somewhere?
Right.
Don't be afraid to follow up, because sometimes you have to kind of press them a little bit. We didn't when we had ours.
We didn't have to. We were fortunate.
We were, but sometimes you do. And just expect that.
Very, very fortunate. Sometimes it takes multiple times reporting. If you suspect a child is being abused and you have good suspicion and you report once, nothing's done, report it again. And if you have to, report it again.
And you can report to multiple agencies.
Yes.
So say that you report it to the police and the police officer kind of blows you off and you're like, well, I think this is actually a pretty big deal. Then move on to, we have children and youth.
I was going to say, there are local agencies that,
the sheriff's department. We have
Absolutely.
state police.
Absolutely.
We
that
have
can get the ball rolling.
We have district attorneys.
Right.
Right. You don't have to just throw your hands up and say, well, that fell flat.
Right.
So if you really are convinced that a crime has taken place, don't just throw your hands up and give up. Right. Go to different people. But the other side of that is, like we mentioned, if it ends up not being a reportable incident, then
then we know.
It's always better to err on the side of reporting.
Right. The law is the law, and we don't necessarily agree with every law that has to do with abuse. The guidelines are kind of vague in a lot of areas. They're loose in a lot of other areas. And we wish they were different, but they're not always what we want them to be. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't still report and do our part.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we are specifically talking about when abuse was perpetrated on a minor.
Right.
We've talked about this in past podcasts, but when the victim is an adult, it gets a little bit trickier, at least with mandated reporting, because that mandate is no longer there.
Right.
And then you become what's called a permissive reporter. You have permission to make a good faith report. But you have to use judgment. That's one of those, is your reporting going to put somebody's life at risk? And sometimes that is the case. And,
that's where it gets a little tricky. But
we're specifically talking about
right.
reporting abuse perpetrated against a minor,
yes.
a minor victim.
Right.
So again, don't overcomplicate it. Don't try to think of every scenario and, am I going to ruin somebody's life if I report? The answer is no. If somebody's innocent, they have nothing. It's an inconvenience, but it's not going to ruin their life. Typically, when an investigation is not going to be opened up unless there's pretty
good, hard, solid facts.
Either evidence or just
right.
good information
right.
that is going to open up an investigation. Most of the time, there's unfortunately not an investigation that's
right.
opened up. So, yeah, you're not going to wreck somebody's life who's an innocent person by reporting. People who are innocent are not going to go to prison. It's just, that's not going to happen. So I think sometimes we watch a little bit too much TV.
Right.
And that kind of hinders us from reporting.
Exactly right.
I just think, again, if it meets that threshold of reasonable suspicion, go in and report it.
Because we have to remember there is a child at risk.
Yeah.
And that child is not going to report the incident.
Exactly right.
It's up to us to do that.
Exactly right.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a quick process.
There's
not a whole lot.
Actually.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, you're in and out.
Right.
Or you're on the phone and off the phone. Everything should take under an hour.
Right.
60 minutes. Report. All right. If this generates questions, feel free to ask. We can always do a follow-up episode if a bunch of questions come in. This is just kind of scratching the surface to give a brief overview. But we'd be happy to
absolutely
follow
when
up
this
with questions
airs,
in another episode.
List your questions that you have, and we'll pay attention to it and do a follow-up if need be.
And if you find a gun, for the love of money, don't knock on the door or walk into a police station
carrying a gun, which is
because
exactly
they don't know
what I would have done.
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought is
I didn't think
a police officer looking at his camera from a back room, seeing a man with his two kids holding a rifle. Probably not a good idea.
Probably not, Jimmy.
Probably not a good idea. Anyway, we'll end on that note. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.